The siren screamed through Marcus's backyard as 3 squad cars surrounded his family barbecue. 23 guests froze, plates of ribs trembling in their hands. His 8-year-old daughter clutched his leg, tears streaming down her face as officers approached with hands on their holsters. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints about illegal activity," the lead officer announced, his voice cutting through the smell of charcoal and cornbread. Marcus felt his world tilting, until he spotted her. Karen Whitmore, standing across the street with her phone raised, recording every humiliating second with a satisfied smirk. She had no idea what she'd just unleashed. The late afternoon sun painted Marcus Thompson's backyard in golden hues as smoke from his custom-built barbecue pit curled lazily into the Texas sky. The aroma of slow-cooked brisket and spiced ribs had been perfuming the neighborhood for hours, drawing family and friends like moths to flame. It was supposed to be perfect, his daughter Zoe's 8th birthday party, complete with bounce house, face painting, and enough barbecue to feed half of Cedar Ridge subdivision. Marcus adjusted the damper on his smoker, a beast of steel and craftsmanship, that had taken him 3 years to build in his garage. The meat thermometer read a perfect 203 degrees. "Almost ready, baby girl," he called to Zoe, who was leading a pack of kids in an impromptu game of tag around the oak tree his grandfather had planted 40 years ago. "Daddy, when can we eat? I'm starving." Zoe's gap-toothed grin could have powered the entire neighborhood. Her princess dress, a compromise between her desire to be fancy and his insistence she wear something she could get dirty, fluttered as she spun in circles. 5 more minutes, sweetheart. Good things come to those who wait. His wife Sarah emerged from the house carrying a tray of her famous cornbread, her sundress swishing around her knees. Even after 12 years of marriage, she still took his breath away. "The Hendersons just pulled up," she said, nodding toward the driveway where their elderly neighbors were slowly making their way toward the gate. "And your brother texted, he's 10 minutes out." Marcus surveyed his domain with satisfaction. The backyard he'd spent every weekend perfecting looked like something from a magazine spread. Fairy lights strung between trees, checkered tablecloths on rented tables, and enough folding chairs to seat an army. The bounce house dominated one corner, its rainbow colors vivid against the green lawn he'd watered religiously through the summer drought. "Marcus Thompson, you've outdone yourself," said Janet Martinez, their next-door neighbor, as she balanced baby Carlos on her hip. "This smells better than the restaurant downtown." "Family recipe," Marcus replied, pride swelling in his chest. "My granddad taught my dad taught me. Some secrets are worth keeping." The guest list had grown organically over the past week. What started as a small family gathering had evolved into a neighborhood celebration. The Patels from 2 houses down, the Johnsons who lived behind them, Sarah's co-workers from the elementary school where she taught 3rd grade, and a handful of Marcus's colleagues from the fire department. 23 people in total, not counting the kids who seemed to multiply every time he counted heads. Uncle Marcus. His nephew Devon came barreling through the gate, followed by Marcus's brother Jerome and sister-in-law Lisa. At 15, Devon was all knees and elbows, but he could put away barbecue like a man twice his size. "Dev, just in time. I was about to send search and rescue." Marcus pulled his nephew into a headlock, ruffling his carefully styled hair. "Traffic was insane on 35, Jerome explained, accepting a beer from the cooler. "But we could smell this feast from 6 blocks away. You trying to feed the whole city?" "Just the good people," Marcus replied, his gaze unconsciously drifting toward the house across the street. Karen Whitmore's pristine white colonial stood like a monument to sterile perfection, its manicured lawn creating a stark contrast to the warm chaos of his own yard. He'd noticed her watching from her window earlier, her face pressed against the glass like she was studying specimens in a lab. The Whitmores had moved in 18 months ago, and Karen had made her feelings about the neighborhood clear from day one. The Homeowners Association emails started within a week of their arrival. Complaints about trash placement, requests for community standards regarding lawn ornaments, and thinly veiled suggestions about property values and maintaining appearances. Marcus had tried to be neighborly. He'd introduced himself, offered to help with their move, even invited them to his annual 4th of July barbecue. Karen had looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language, her eyes scanning his work clothes and calloused hands with barely concealed disdain. "We appreciate the gesture," she'd said, her voice carrying the kind of chill that could freeze beer in July, "but we prefer to keep to ourselves." Fair enough. Marcus believed in live and let live. But Karen Whitmore seemed to believe in live and complain about everyone else. Daddy, the kids want to know if they can have cake before dinner. Zoe tugged at his apron, bringing his attention back to the party. Nice try, princess. Brisket first, then cake. That's the law of the land. As if summoned by the mention of food, the crowd began gravitating toward the smoking pit. Marcus began his ritual, the ceremonial opening that turned eating into an event. The lid lifted with a theatrical hiss of steam, revealing 4 perfect briskets that had been cooking since dawn. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced in his best ringmaster voice, after 14 hours of low and slow perfection, I present to you the main event. The crowd cheered, plates materializing as if by magic. Marcus carved the first brisket with practiced precision, each slice revealing the perfect pink smoke ring that was his signature. The meat fell apart at the touch of his knife, juices running across the cutting board in dark rivulets. This is better than heaven, Mrs. Henderson declared after her first bite, and Marcus felt the familiar warm glow of satisfaction that came from feeding people well. But even as he served plate after plate, laughing at jokes and accepting compliments, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes, his eyes would drift to the Whitmore house, where he could swear he saw curtains twitching and shadows moving behind windows. You're paranoid, Sarah whispered, appearing at his elbow with a fresh beer. She's probably just jealous she wasn't invited. I did invite them. Remember? Last year and this year too. And she looked at me like I'd suggested we sacrifice a goat in her front yard. Sarah laughed, the sound mixing with the general din of conversation and children's laughter. Her loss. This is the best party Cedar Ridge has ever seen. It was true. The backyard hummed with the kind of contentment that only came from good food, good company, and perfect weather. Kids ran between tables with cake-sticky fingers while adults lingered over second helpings, nobody in any hurry to leave. The sun had begun its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in warm amber light. Marcus was just thinking about starting the cleanup when he heard it, the distant wail of sirens growing steadily louder. He paused, fork halfway to his mouth, listening as the sound grew closer and closer until it seemed to be coming from. Are those sirens stopping here? Janet asked, baby Carla suddenly fussy in her arms. The first police car rounded the corner. At the end of the street, followed by a second, then a third. Red and blue lights strobed across the houses, turning the peaceful suburban evening into something from a crime drama. The cars pulled up to Marcus's house with practiced precision, officers emerging before the engines had fully stopped. Conversation died like someone had flipped a switch. 23 adults and a dozen children stood frozen in tableau, plates, and cups suspended midair as they watched 6 officers approach the backyard gate. What the hell? Jerome muttered, moving instinctively closer to his family. Marcus felt Sarah's hand slip into his, her palm damp with sudden sweat. Zoe had appeared at his other side, her small hand gripping his leg as she peered around him at the approaching officers. Daddy, why are the police here? Her voice was small and scared, cutting through Marcus like a blade. I don't know, baby. But everything's going to be okay. The lead officer, a stocky man with graying temples and the kind of mustache that belonged in an 80s cop show, reached the gate first. His hand rested casually on his service weapon as he scanned the crowd with professional wariness. Excuse me, he called out, his voice carrying the authority that came with years of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. I'm Officer Rodriguez with Cedar Ridge PD. We've received multiple complaints about illegal activity at this address. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Multiple complaints. Illegal activity. He looked around his backyard, at the bounce house and fairy lights, at his daughter's birthday decorations, at tables full of neighbors sharing a meal, and felt reality tilt on its axis. I'm sorry, what kind of illegal activity? Marcus found his voice, though it sounded strange to his own ears. Sir, we are going to need everyone to remain calm while we investigate reports of a large gathering, possible noise violations, and Rodriguez consulted his notepad, suspected drug activity. The last 2 words hung in the air like smoke, from a fire that would consume everything Marcus had built. Drug activity. At his daughter's birthday party. Officer Rodriguez emerged from Marcus's garage 15 minutes later, his face set in the grim expression of a man who'd been made a fool of. Behind him, Two younger officers shook their heads as they approached, their search having turned up. Nothing more incriminating than lawn equipment and Christmas decorations. "Mr. Thompson," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a new tone, part apology, part professional irritation. "We've completed our search. There's nothing here that suggests any illegal activity." The crowd had remained frozen throughout the investigation. Plates of food growing cold as neighbors watched their friend and colleague being treated like a common criminal. Zoe had pressed herself against Marcus's leg so tightly he could feel her trembling through his jeans. "So we are free to continue the party?" Sarah asked, though her voice held none of its earlier warmth. "Yes, You're free to." "What?" "About the noise complaint." The voice cut across the backyard like a blade, sharp and demanding. Everyone turned to see Karen Whitmore striding across the street, her phone still clutched in her manicured hand. She'd changed from her earlier outfit into what Marcus privately called her HOA enforcement uniform, a crisp white blouse, pressed khakis, and the kind of shoes that clicked authoritatively on pavement. You are?" Rodriguez asked, though. His tone suggested he already knew the answer. Karen Whitmore, concerned citizen and resident of 1247 Maple Drive. She gestured toward her pristine colonial. "I'm the one who called about the disturbance." The word disturbance hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus felt the eyes of his guests shifting between him and Karen, the social mathematics of the moment becoming crystal clear. This woman had called the police on them. On a child's birthday party. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rodriguez said carefully, "we've investigated your complaints. There's no evidence of illegal activity, and frankly, the noise level doesn't exceed city ordinances. It's 6:30 p.m. on a Saturday." Karen's face flushed, but she pressed on. "What about the excessive number of vehicles? The blocking of the street? The gathering itself?" Her voice rose with each accusation, becoming more shrill and desperate. People are allowed to have guests. They're parked legally on the street, which is public property, and there's no law against having a birthday party." Marcus watched Karen's composure cracking in real time. This wasn't going according to her script. The police were supposed to shut down the party, maybe even arrest someone. Instead, she was being politely told she'd wasted everyone's time. But surely there are regulations about large gatherings? Permits required. Health department violations. Karen's eyes darted around the backyard, looking for ammunition. "That smoker, is it up to code? Are they licensed to serve food to this many people?" "Jesus Christ, Karen." The words escaped Marcus before he could stop them. "It's a birthday party, not a restaurant." "Language, Mr. Thompson," Karen snapped, pointing an accusatory finger. "There are children present. This is exactly the kind of behavior that what?" Marcus stepped forward, his patience finally snapping. "That makes you call the cops on an 8-year-old's birthday party? That makes you accuse a firefighter of dealing drugs?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Until that moment, the drug accusation had been whispered between the officers, but now everyone heard it. Marcus saw the shock ripple across faces, Mrs. Henderson's mouth falling open, Janet Martinez pulling baby Carlos closer to her chest, Jerome's expression darkening like a storm front. "I never said anything about drugs," Karen said quickly. But her voice lacked conviction. "Bullshit." Jerome stepped forward, his firefighter's build making him an imposing figure even in civilian clothes. "You don't get 3 squad cars for a noise complaint. What exactly did you tell them?" Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Sir, I think everyone should know." The voice belonged to Devon, Marcus's 15-year-old nephew, but it carried surprising authority. He was staring at his phone, his face pale. "Everyone needs to hear this." "Devon, what?" Lisa started, but her son held up his hand. "I recorded it," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "When the cops first got here. I was live streaming for my friends, and I caught what she said to the other officer." He looked up at Karen, his young face hard with disgust. "You want me to play it back?" Karen went very still. That's illegal. Recording without consent." "Actually, it's not," said Tom Patel, who'd been quietly observing from near the bounce house. As a lawyer, his words carried weight. Texas is a one-party consent state, and if you are speaking loudly enough for others to hear, there's no expectation of privacy. Play it, Marcus said quietly. Devon's fingers moved across his phone. Screen. A moment later, Karen's voice emerged from the tiny speaker, tinny but clear. I'm telling you, officer, there's definitely drug activity going on over there. I've seen people coming and going all day, exchange money, the whole setup. That man has a record, I'm sure of it. These people don't belong in this neighborhood. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their chatter dying away until the only sound was the distant hum of traffic on the main road. These people, Sarah repeated, her voice deadly quiet. What did you mean by these people, Karen? Karen's face had gone from flushed to ashen. I meant, the party was very loud, and there were a lot of people. No, said Mrs. Henderson, speaking for the first time since the police arrived. At 73, Eleanor Henderson had lived in Cedar Ridge longer than anyone. Her voice carried the weight of decades spent watching neighborhoods change, families come and go. You meant black people. That's what you meant, isn't it? The accusation hung in the air like smoke from Marcus's barbecue pit, unavoidable and impossible to ignore. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. That's not. I would never. I have black friends. She stammered. Name one, Jerome said flatly. Karen's mouth worked soundlessly. Around the backyard, Marcus could see the moment when understanding crystallized in his neighbors' faces. This wasn't about noise or permits or property values. This was about something uglier, something that had been festering in Karen Whitmore's heart since the day she moved to Cedar Ridge. Officer Rodriguez said, his professional mask finally slipping to reveal genuine anger. Did you file a false police report? There was loud music, and I saw people, and I thought. Karen was backing away now, her earlier confidence evaporating like steam from a smoker. You thought what? That a black firefighter hosting his daughter's birthday party must be dealing drugs? That's what crossed your mind when you saw barbecue smoke and heard children laughing. Rodriguez's partner, a younger black officer whose nameplate read Johnson, stepped forward. Throughout the investigation, he'd remained silent, professional. Now his eyes burned with barely contained fury. I want to be very clear about something, Johnson said, his voice controlled but seething with rage. You called 911 and reported suspected drug activity with no evidence whatsoever. You tied up 3 units on a Saturday evening when we could have been responding to actual emergencies. You traumatized children and humiliated a decorated firefighter in front of his community. Karen was fully retreating now, backing toward the street. I was just being a concerned citizen. I have the right to. You have the right to remain silent, Johnson cut her off. And given the circumstances, I'd suggest you exercise it. Are you threatening me? Karen's voice cracked on the last word. I'm advising you, Rodriguez interjected, that filing false police reports is a Class B misdemeanor in Texas, punishable by up to 6 months in county jail and a $2,000 fine. The color drained completely from Karen's face. But I didn't know for sure. I was just concerned about. About what? The question came from an unexpected source, Zoe, who had finally found her voice. The 8-year-old stepped out. From behind her father, her princess dress wrinkled but her chin raised defiantly. About my birthday party. Something in that small, clear voice seemed to crack Karen's remaining composure. She looked around the backyard, at the bounce house and fairy lights, at the plates of food and birthday decorations, at the faces of 23 people who now saw her exactly as she was. This is all a misunderstanding, she said weakly. I never meant for. I was just trying to maintain community standards. Whose standards? The question came from Tom Patel. Because last I checked, birthday parties were pretty standard everywhere. Karen's retreat had brought her to the edge of the property. She stood on the sidewalk now, clutching her phone like a lifeline. You people are twisting everything. I'm not a racist. I'm not. Then what are you? Sarah asked. The question was quiet, but it cut through Karen's protests like a scalpel. Because from where I'm standing, you're a woman who saw a black family having a barbecue and immediately thought drug dealers. You called 911 on a child's birthday party. You tried to have my husband arrested in front of our daughter. So what? Are you, Karen? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For a moment, she stood there on the sidewalk, exposed and ashamed, while everyone waited for an answer that would never come. Then, with a strangled sob, she turned and fled. Toward her house, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavement as sure. Sunday morning arrived grey and oppressive, the kind of overcast sky that seemed to press down on Cedar Ridge like a heavy blanket. Marcus sat on his back porch with his second cup of coffee, staring at the remnants of yesterday's party. Paper plates scattered by the wind, a forgotten balloon tangled in the oak tree, the smoker still radiating the faint smell of hickory and shame. Sarah emerged from the house in her bathrobe, phone clutched in her hand. Her eyes were red-rimmed. From a sleepless night spent fielding calls from concerned neighbours and family members who'd seen Devon's livestream, which had somehow gone viral overnight. Channel 8 wants an interview, she said, settling into the chair beside him. So does the Chronicle. And someone from that civil rights organisation downtown. Marcus grunted, not trusting his voice. The media attention was the last thing he wanted. All he'd ever tried to do was live quietly, raise his daughter, serve his community. Now he was going to be poster boy for suburban racism, his family's humiliation broadcast across Houston. There's something else, Sarah continued, her voice careful. Janet called. She said Karen's been making rounds since dawn, going door to door. Doing what? Damage control. Trying to convince people that she was justified, that there really was suspicious activity. She told the Patels you've been having unusual visitors at odd hours. Marcus's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. What unusual visitors? That's what Tom asked. Apparently, she's been keeping a log. License plates, times, descriptions. She told him you had 3 different black men visit your house last Tuesday between 6 and 8 p.m. The absurdity of it might have been funny if it weren't so sinister. Jerome came by to help me fix the fence. Devon was with him. And Officer Williams from the station dropped off those fundraiser tickets for the burn victims. I know that. You know that. But Karen's spinning it like you're running some kind of operation out of the house. Marcus set down his coffee cup. With deliberate care, the ceramic clicking against the porch rail. She's doubling down. Gets worse. She called the HOA this morning. Emergency meeting tonight at 7. The Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. Marcus had managed to avoid their meetings for 15 years, paying his dues and maintaining his property while ignoring their endless emails about acceptable mailbox colors and holiday decoration guidelines. But Karen was forcing his hand, dragging their private nightmare into the public arena. Who's the president now? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Richard Blackwood. Marcus closed his eyes. Of all the people in Cedar Ridge, Richard Blackwood was perhaps the worst possible choice to mediate this situation. A retired corporate attorney with political aspirations and the social awareness of a brick, Blackwood had been campaigning for City Council on a platform of maintaining community standards and protecting property values, code words that every black family in the neighborhood understood perfectly. The sound of a car door slamming drew their attention to the street. A silver BMW had pulled up to the Whitmore house, and a man in an expensive suit was walking toward Karen's front door. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the briefcase, the confident stride, the general air of someone accustomed to winning arguments. She's lawyered up, Sarah observed. Smart move. Filing false police reports is still a crime, no matter how you dress it up. But even as he said it, Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. Karen wasn't the type to hire a lawyer unless she had a plan. And people like Karen always had plans. His phone buzzed. A text from Jerome. Turn on Channel 8 right now. Marcus fumbled for the remote, clicking on the small TV they kept on the porch for weekend mornings. The local news was running a segment about racial tensions in suburban Houston, complete with aerial shots of Cedar Ridge and a reporter standing in front of Marcus's house. What started as a simple birthday party has become a flashpoint for discussions about race, class, and community standards in one of Houston's most affluent suburbs, the reporter was saying. We'll have more on this developing story throughout the day. The segment cut to a brief interview with Karen Whitmore, standing in her front yard looking composed and sympathetic. She'd changed tactics overnight, trading her authoritative HOA persona for the role of concerned neighbor. I simply wanted to ensure everyone's safety, she was telling the camera. When you see unusual activity in your neighborhood, it's your civic duty to report it. I never intended for this to become about race. That's simply not who I am. Marcus felt Sarah's hand slip into his, her fingers ice-cold despite the humid morning air. The reporter continued, Mrs. Whitmore has called for an emergency homeowners association meeting tonight to address what she calls the breakdown of community communication in Cedar Ridge. She maintains that her concerns were legitimate and that the response has been blown out of proportion. The response, Marcus repeated flatly. Like calling the cops on a kid's birthday party is just a minor social faux pas. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Captain Rodriguez from Station 19. Captain. Marcus, I need you to come in. We need to talk. The tone was all business, with an undercurrent Marcus didn't like. What's going on? There's been a complaint filed about your conduct yesterday. Someone's claiming you were verbally abusive to a neighbor, used profanity in front of children, and, Rodriguez paused, clearly uncomfortable, that your behavior reflects poorly on the department. Marcus felt the world tilt. Someone filed a complaint about me. Look, it's bullshit, and everyone here knows it. But the city's breathing down our necks about community relations, and this thing's all over social media. I need you to come in so we can get ahead of it. After hanging up, Marcus sat in stunned silence. Karen wasn't just defending herself, she was going on the offensive. While he'd been wallowing in humiliation, she'd been building a counter-narrative, turning herself from aggressor into victim. She's trying to get you fired, Sarah said quietly. She can try, but she doesn't know who she's messing with. Sarah looked at him sharply. What does that mean? Marcus stood up, his decision crystallizing. It means I'm done being the good neighbor, done turning the other cheek. If Karen Whitmore wants a war, she's about to find out what 15 years of biting my tongue has been protecting her from. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. Tom Patel answered on the second ring. Tom, it's Marcus. I need to ask you something about property law and maybe civil rights violations. 3 hours later, Marcus was sitting in Tom Patel's home office, a converted bedroom lined with legal texts and certificates. Tom had cleared his Sunday afternoon calendar after hearing the full story, and now he was leaning back in his chair with the expression of a man who'd found something interesting. She's been documenting your visitors, Tom asked, making notes, on a yellow legal pad. Apparently. License plates, times, physical descriptions. Sarah said she had a whole log. That's problematic. For her, I mean. Depending on how long she's been doing it, and what she's been recording, it could constitute harassment. Maybe even stalking. Marcus felt a spark of hope. Enough to do something about. Possibly. But there's something else. Tom leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Shoot. Have you ever had any legal troubles? Arrests, convictions, anything that might give her ammunition? Clean as a whistle. Not even a speeding ticket in the last 5 years. Tom nodded, then hesitated. What about your family? Anyone she might have dirt on? Marcus was about to say no when something made him pause. A memory from last Christmas, Devon acting strange, Jerome and Lisa having hushed conversations that stopped when he entered the room. Tom, if someone in my family had issues, would that affect me professionally? Depends on the issues and how closely you're connected. Why? Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. My nephew Devon. Last year, there was some trouble at school. I don't know the details, but he was suspended for a few weeks. Jerome never told me the whole story. Tom made another note. What kind of trouble? I honestly don't know. But if Karen's been watching the house, documenting visitors. Marcus trailed off as the implications hit him. She would have seen Devon coming and going. A 15-year-old black kid with a suspension on his record. We need to find out what happened with Devon, Tom said grimly. Because if there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen Whitmore, it's that they never go into battle without ammunition. As if summoned by their conversation, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You have until the HOA meeting tonight to withdraw your threats of legal action. Otherwise, The neighborhood will learn some very interesting facts about your family. A concerned neighbor Marcus showed the text to Tom, who whistled low. Well, Tom said, now it's definitely blackmail, which is a felony. But even as Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at Karen's legal misstep, a cold dread was settling in his stomach. What did she know about Devon? And how much damage could she do before they found a way to stop her? Across the street, Karen Whitmore was sitting in her pristine living room with her lawyer and Richard Blackwood, spreading papers across her glass coffee table like a general planning. The Cedar Ridge Community Center had never hosted a more explosive gathering. By 6:45 p.m., the main conference room was packed beyond capacity, with residents spilling into the hallway and lobby. Word of the emergency HOA meeting had spread through social media like wildfire, drawing not just neighborhood residents but local activists, reporters, and curious onlookers from across Houston. Marcus sat in the third row with Sarah and Tom Patel, feeling like a defendant at his own trial. Behind them, he could hear the murmur of familiar voices, neighbors he'd known for years, people whose lawns he'd helped mow, whose children had played with Zoe. But tonight, the room felt divided, charged with the kind of tension that preceded either justice or catastrophe. Karen Whitmore had arrived 20 minutes early, flanked by her lawyer and Richard Blackwood. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a navy blazer over a white blouse, professional but approachable, the uniform of someone who took civic responsibility seriously. She sat at the front table facing the crowd, a stack of manila folders arranged before her like ammunition. Before we begin, Blackwood announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to controlling rooms, I want to remind everyone that this is a private HOA meeting, not a public forum. Recording devices must be turned off, and we ask that our media friends respect our privacy during these proceedings. Marcus noticed several reporters reluctantly lowering their phones, but Devon, sitting with Jerome in the back row, kept his device partially hidden. Smart kid. Now then, Blackwood continued, we are here tonight to address what Mrs. Whitmore has characterized as a breakdown in community standards and communication. Mrs. Whitmore, would you like to present your concerns? Karen stood gracefully, her composure perfect despite the hostile energy radiating from half the room. Thank you, Richard. Neighbors, I want to begin by saying that what happened yesterday has been deeply mischaracterized. I am not a racist. I am not a troublemaker. I am a concerned resident who has documented a pattern of concerning behavior that culminated in what I believe to be a potentially dangerous situation. She opened the first manila folder, revealing a stack of photographs. Over the past 18 months, I have documented numerous incidents involving the Thompson residence at 1251 Maple Drive. Excessive traffic at unusual hours. Visitors who appeared to be conducting business rather than social calls. Loud gatherings that violated noise ordinances. Marcus felt Sarah's hand tighten on his arm. The photographs, taken with a telephoto lens from Karen's upstairs window, showed various people coming and going from his house. Some he recognized, family members, co-workers, neighbors. Others were harder to identify from the distance and angle. Furthermore, Karen continued, I have documented specific incidents involving Mr. Thompson's nephew, Devon Mitchell, that raise serious questions about the kind of influences being brought into our community. The room went dead silent. In the back, Marcus could see Jerome rising to his feet, his face dark with fury. What the hell are you talking about? Jerome called out. Blackwood banged his gavel. Sir, please. No, let her answer, Jerome pushed forward through the crowd. My son's name just came out of her mouth. I want to know what lies she's been spreading about a 15-year-old kid. Karen's lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but she waved him off. Mr. Mitchell, your son, has a juvenile record that includes, stop right there. The voice came from the doorway, where Detective Maria Santos was pushing through the crowd, her badge clearly visible on her belt. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to stop talking. The room erupted. Blackwood banged his gavel repeatedly, demanding order, while reporters surged forward and residents craned their necks to see what was happening. Marcus felt like he was watching a car accident in slow motion. Spectacular, inevitable, and somehow satisfying. Detective Santos, Houston PD, she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. I'm sorry to interrupt your meeting, but I have a warrant for the arrest of Karen Elizabeth Whitmore. Karen went pale, but her lawyer was on his feet immediately. On what charges? Detective. Harassment, stalking, invasion of privacy, and as of this afternoon, attempted extortion. Santos pulled out her handcuffs. Mrs. Whitmore, you have the right to remain silent. This is outrageous. Karen's composure finally cracked. I was protecting this neighborhood. These people don't belong here. They're bringing crime and... I strongly advise you to stop talking, her lawyer interrupted desperately. But Karen was beyond reason now, her mask finally slipping completely. Do you know what kind of people we are dealing with? Drug dealers, criminals, thugs. I have evidence. You have illegally obtained surveillance footage, stolen mail, and a pattern of harassment going back 6 months, Santos interrupted. You also sent a threatening text message this afternoon that constitutes attempted extortion under Texas law. The detective turned to address the room. For those wondering, we've been investigating Mrs. Whitmore since March, when 3 different families filed complaints about her behavior. What we discovered was a systematic campaign of harassment targeting specifically African American and Latino families in this neighborhood. Santos pulled out a tablet, scrolling through files. License plate tracking, photographing children without permission, filing false reports with city services, attempting to access juvenile records through fraudulent means, and maintaining what can only be described as a racial surveillance database. Marcus felt the room's energy shift like a tide turning. Suddenly, he wasn't the defendant anymore, he was the victim. And Karen Whitmore wasn't a concerned neighbor, she was a criminal. The surveillance equipment we found in Mrs. Whitmore's house includes telephoto cameras positioned to monitor 5 different minority-owned residences, Santos continued. She's been recording private conversations in backyards, documenting visitors, and building files on families she deemed undesirable. Karen's lawyer was frantically whispering to his client, but she shook him off violently. They need to be stopped. This neighborhood was perfect before they came. Property values are plummeting because of what? The question came from Mrs. Henderson, who had managed to push her way to the front of the crowd despite her 73 years. Because of families like the Thompsons, who've been nothing but good neighbors for 15 years. Because of people like Tom Patel, who volunteers at the food bank. Because of the Martinez family, who organized the coat drive for homeless children last winter. The elderly woman's voice shook with rage. Karen, I've lived in this neighborhood longer than anyone here. I watched Marcus Thompson grow from a young firefighter into a man who would risk his life for any of us. I've watched him raise that beautiful little girl, maintain his property, and contribute to this community in ways you never have and never will. Mrs. Henderson turned to face the crowd. This woman has been watching our houses like some kind of neighborhood Stasi. She's been photographing our children, our guests, our daily lives. She called the police on a birthday party because she couldn't stand the sight of black people being happy in her vicinity. The room erupted in applause, drowning out Karen's attempts to respond. Detective Santos used the distraction to move closer, handcuffs ready. Mrs. Whitmore, Santos said formally, you're under arrest for harassment, stalking, invasion of privacy, and attempted extortion. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As the Miranda rights continued, Marcus watched Karen's face cycle through denial, rage, and finally, desperate calculation. Even in handcuffs, she was looking for an angle, a way to turn this to her advantage. You'll see, she called out as Santos led her toward the door. When property values crash and crime goes up, you'll remember that I was trying to protect you. I was the only one brave enough to what? The voice belonged to Richard Blackwood, and it carried a tone Marcus had never heard from the HOA president before, disgust, tinged with something that might have been shame. To terrorize families? To file false police reports? To turn our neighborhood into your personal surveillance state? Blackwood stood up, his face grim. As president of this HOA, I want to make something clear. Karen Whitmore's actions do not represent this organization or this community. What she did was illegal, immoral, and completely contrary to everything we claim to stand for. He turned to Marcus. Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Thompson, on behalf of the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association, I owe you and your family a formal apology. What happened yesterday was unconscionable, and what we've learned tonight makes it clear that you've been subjected to harassment that no family should have to endure. As Karen was led from the room, still protesting her innocence, Marcus felt Sarah squeeze his hand. Around them, neighbors were approaching, some to apologize, others to express outrage, many to ask how they could help. But Marcus's attention was drawn to Devon, who was still holding his phone, still recording. The 15-year-old met his uncle's eyes across the room and nodded slightly. Everything Karen had said, every racist statement, every admission of illegal surveillance, it was all captured, ready to be shared with the world. Detective Santos paused at the door, turning back to address the room one final time. Ladies and gentle. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in his backyard again, but this time the occasion was different. The October air carried the crisp promise of fall, and smoke from his barbecue pit mixed with the scent of burning leaves from the Hendersons' yard next door. The Cedar Ridge Community Unity Festival, an idea born from the ashes of that terrible Saturday night in April, had drawn nearly 300 people from across the neighborhood and beyond. "Daddy, Channel 8 wants to interview you again," Zoe announced, tugging at his apron. At 8.5, she'd become something of a celebrity in her own right, the little girl in the princess dress who'd asked the question that cracked Karen Whitmore's composure. "Can I be on TV too?" "We'll see, princess. But remember what we talked about, don't let it go to my head, and always be kind to people, even when they're not kind to us," Zoe recited dutifully, then grinned. "But can I still wear my crown?" Marcus laughed, the sound mixing with the general din of conversation, children playing, and live music from the small stage they'd erected near the oak tree. "You can wear your crown." The festival had been Tom Patel's idea, initially proposed as a way to heal the community divide that Karen's arrest had exposed. What had started as a simple block party had evolved into something larger, a celebration of diversity, unity, and the kind of neighborhood Cedar Ridge had always claimed to be but had never quite achieved. Sarah appeared at his elbow, carrying a plate pile high with barbecue that made his mouth water despite having been cooking all morning. "The mayor's here," she said, nodding toward the street where a small motorcade was pulling up. "And that reporter from the Washington Post." Marcus groaned. The story had taken on a life of its own over the past 6 months, becoming a symbol of suburban racism and the power of community response. Books deals had been offered, speaking engagements proposed, documentary crews had camped out on his lawn. He'd turned down most of it, wanting nothing more than to return to his quiet life as a firefighter and father. But some things he couldn't avoid. Karen Whitmore's trial was set to begin next month, and Marcus would be the star witness. The prosecution had built an airtight case. They had recordings, photographs, digital evidence of her illegal surveillance, and her own recorded statements from the HOA meeting. Her lawyer was already floating plea bargain options. Marcus. Jerome appeared through the crowd, Devon in tow. The teenager had grown 3 inches since April and carried himself with a new confidence. The revelation of Karen's illegal attempts to access his juvenile records that contained nothing more serious than a schoolyard fight and a graffiti incident, had transformed him from a potential liability into a symbol of how racism distorted perception. "How's the guest of honor holding up?" Jerome asked, accepting a beer from the cooler. "Still can't believe this is my life now," Marcus replied. "Remember when my biggest worry was whether the brisket was too dry?" "Speaking of which," Devon interjected, pulling out his phone, "we just hit 1 million views on the arrest video." The footage Devon had captured at the HOA meeting had indeed gone viral, spawning countless reaction videos, think pieces, and social media campaigns. #Justice for Marcus had trended for weeks, but more importantly, it had inspired other families to come forward with their own stories of harassment and discrimination. "Any word from across the street?" Jerome asked, glancing toward the empty house that had once been the Whitmore residence. "Sold last week," Sarah replied. "Family from Dallas. He's a pediatrician. She teaches high school chemistry. They seem nice." The Whitmore house had sat empty since Karen's arrest, becoming a symbol of the toxic presence that had been removed from the neighborhood. Her husband had filed for divorce within a month, taking their children and relocating to Austin. The house had languished on the market until a black family made an offer, which, according to neighborhood gossip, Karen had tried to block from her jail cell through increasingly desperate legal maneuvers. "Mr. Thompson." A young woman with a press badge approached tentatively. "I'm Jessica Liu from the Chronicle. I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions about the impact this has had on community policing policies." Marcus sighed. Even at his own festival, he couldn't escape being a symbol. 5 minutes, he agreed. But then I need to get back to feeding people. The interview covered familiar ground: how the incident had sparked citywide conversations about racial profiling, how the police department had implemented new protocols for responding to neighbor complaints, how the HOA had rewritten its bylaws to prevent harassment campaigns. Marcus answered the questions on autopilot, his mind wandering to the deeper changes he'd observed. Mrs. Henderson had become something of a neighborhood activist, organizing diversity training sessions and cultural exchange programs. The Patels had started a legal aid clinic for families facing housing discrimination. Even Richard Blackwood had transformed, using his HOA presidency to advocate for inclusive community policies. Last question, the reporter said. Do you think Karen Whitmore's actions were representative of a larger problem, or was she an isolated case? Marcus considered the question carefully. I think she was an extreme case, but not an isolated one. The difference is that most people with those attitudes keep them hidden. Karen got so consumed by her hatred that she couldn't help herself. She had to act on it, document it, try to weaponize it. And that's what brought her down. As the reporter walked away, Marcus noticed a familiar figure approaching through the crowd. Detective Santos, dressed in civilian clothes but still carrying herself with unmistakable authority. Detective, Marcus greeted her. Didn't expect to see you here. Maria, she corrected. I'm off duty, and I wanted to see how this all turned out. She gestured around the festival. This is impressive. Community effort. I just provided the barbecue. Santos smiled. I also wanted to give you a heads up. Karen's lawyer called this morning. They want to discuss a plea agreement. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd been dreading the trial, not because he was afraid to testify, but because it meant reliving those horrible days when his family had been turned upside down. What kind of plea? 2 years in county, 5 years probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order keeping her away from Cedar Ridge. She'd also have to pay restitution to all the families she harassed. And if we go to trial, she's looking at 5 to 10 on the felony charges. But trials are unpredictable, and her lawyer's good. He'll try to paint her as a mentally ill woman who made mistakes, not a calculating racist who committed crimes. Marcus nodded, understanding the choice he was being asked to make. Justice versus certainty. The satisfaction of seeing Karen face the full consequences of her actions versus the security of knowing she'd definitely be punished and kept away from his family. I need to talk to Sarah, he said finally. Take your time. But the DA needs an answer by Friday. As Santos disappeared back into the crowd, Marcus found himself staring across the street at the empty Whitmore house. 6 months ago, that house had represented everything wrong with his neighborhood. The hidden prejudice, the surveillance, the constant threat of someone trying to make his family unwelcome in their own home. Now it was just a house. Empty. Powerless. Waiting for a new family to fill it with better memories. Penny for your thoughts. Sarah had returned, carrying 2 plates of food. Santos says Karen wants to plea bargain. Sarah's expression hardened. What do you want to do? Marcus looked around the festival, at families of every background sharing food and conversation, at children playing together without seeing color, at neighbors who had come together to heal a wound that had been festering for years. I want her to get help, he said finally. Real help. The kind that might actually change her instead of just punishing her. But I also want to make sure she can never do this to another family. So the plea. If it includes serious counseling and keeps her away from here permanently, yeah, I think that's justice too. As the sun began to set over Cedar Ridge, casting long shadows across the festival, Marcus returned to his barbecue pit. The last batch of brisket was almost ready, the meat tender enough to cut with a fork. He opened the smoker and breathed in the aroma that had started this whole mess: hickory smoke and spice, family tradition, and community love. Final call for barbecue, he announced, and the crowd responded with enthusiasm. Plates appeared. Neighbors lined up, and Marcus began the familiar ritual of carving and serving, of feeding people and bringing them together around good food. Zoe appeared at his side, still wearing her crown, her face sticky with barbecue sauce and happiness. Daddy, will you tell me the story again? Which story, princess? About the lady who called the police on my birthday party and how she got arrested and how everyone came together and how we had the best festival ever. Marcus smiled, lifting his daughter onto his shoulders so she could see the entire gathering, hundreds of people of every age and background, sharing a meal in the same backyard where 6 months ago, his family had been humiliated and threatened. Once upon a time, he began, his voice carrying across the backyard, there was a little girl who wanted to have the best birthday party ever. And she did, even though she didn't know it at the time. As he told the story, their story, Marcus,